My name is Wendy and I love nature. I've always loved nature. I've always paid attention to nature. I like watching birds and different animals doing different things. And then when I got my own home, I started gardening, and I figured I love to put a bird feeder out, but I would much rather attract them with, berries in the yard. So I started getting all kinds of native plants that had berries. And one time somebody said, would you like to keep bees? And I had never been interested in insects in my life. And so I said, oh, and then I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And so he started to help me, but then unfortunately wasn't able to. And I wasn't afraid of them, and I started kind of being interested in it. So that hive didn't make it that year. But then the next year I ordered bees, and then I was very successful. But I went to a class at Cornell University up in Ithaca for beekeeping, and I think that it helps. There are ones in the Hudson Valley here that have beekeeping classes, and if you are going to be a beekeeper, then it's important to do that. And beekeepers are very friendly and very nice. But it makes me upset that people are so afraid of bees, honeybees in particular, because they mix them up with a wasp, a hornet, and a yellow jacket. A honeybee, if she stings you, loses her stinger and dies a little while later because her stinger is barbed. A wasp, a hornet, a yellow jacket all have straight stingers, and so they can repeatedly sting you. And so they are something to be afraid of. The difference, honeybees are hairy. Sometimes you don't want to get that close to have to make that decision, but you'll see a wasp is a shinier bee. They're both yellow and black, so that makes it confusing. Also, it's August when it gets hot. Wasps come, yellow jackets, to eat hot dogs and soda. They love protein and they love sugar. Those usually aren't honeybees. Those are usually wasps, so pay attention and, don't fool around with them. The hive, they are a society. They are amazing. They are, they all have to work together. They cannot live alone. You have 3 different types of individuals in the hive. You have the queen, which is only one. You have the female workers, which are probably 90 to 95% of the hive. And then you have drones, which are the males. And interestingly enough, males do not work. They don't have to. They get fed. They just are there for sperm, for reproduction. And if they are lucky enough to be one of the ones that impregnates the virgin queen when she goes out, because she usually has 8 to 10 drones that impregnate her, they die. So it's kind of a win-lose situation. So the female workers, their jobs, they all have different jobs at different points in their life, and they will change the job if it's necessary. Obviously, they rely on nature, so if they're coming out in the spring, they're looking for pollen and nectar. And if there's a lot of pollen and nectar, then they can be very busy. If there isn't so much, then the queen may not lay a lot of eggs, because then they have to feed everybody. So the first thing that happens is the queen lays the egg turns into a larva, worker bees feed the larva bee bread, and then they close the cell up with wax, and 21 days after the egg is laid, they usually have a bee emerge. The bee then is responsible for cleaning the hive that they were born from. And the bees are very clean. They don't have any dead bees in the hive, and they don't have any dirt. If you put a piece of paper in there, they'll find a way to drag it out. It's the only way to, it's important to keep your home clean. It's the same thing with us for bacteria and such. next job is collecting nectar from the bees that forage and pollen. And they take it from the other bee and then they put it in the cell. And they put the nectar in the cell and they fan it down to 17% water. It's absolutely amazing how they know what that is, but they do. And at that point they can seal it. And honey doesn't go bad, it stays good forever. In the Civil War, they used it on wounds. Even now, to this day, sometimes if there's an extreme problem with wound care, they'll use it because it has a hydrogen peroxide effect. Somebody has to build the honeycomb, that they put the honey in. Female bees, yet again, excrete the wax out of their thighs. It would be a lovely thing if we could do that, women. Anyway, that's how they get it out, and then they are amazing architects, and they build this honeycomb, and it's the perfect storage, and it's strong. Architects use it in building buildings. So yeah, and they have a bee space, which is a certain amount of space, and so they're amazing little things. So then after they're collecting honey and pollen, one of the other jobs is a guard bee, and that bee makes sure that the hive is protected, because honey is it has a lot of aroma, and who doesn't like honey, you know? People like honey, ants like honey, bees, other bees, hornets, wasps, bats, moths, beetles, rats, mice, possums, raccoons, all kinds of animals would love to get in there. So there has to be a few bees that are watching, that if something is coming to their entrance, will set an alarm, and then more bees will come to protect them. And I think it works out. Most furry animals, you put the hive on a stand so that the animal has to go up so that their underside is exposed, and then it could be stung, so they're less likely to attack and take the hive apart. Though bears will. We, thank goodness, don't have bears in Bronxville, but my friends in Connecticut and Vermont all have electric fences, because they'll go in and just tip it over and make a mess. One of the last jobs is foraging, and that's when they go out into the world, because it's really a dangerous job. And they get pollen and nectar and water and bring it back to the hive. Interestingly, they use water as air conditioning. So if it gets hot and dry, if they collect water, they bring it in and they fan it, and they are able to keep the temperature correct in the hive. Now the queen likes to be 95 degrees, and so they do try to keep her in that warm temperature. And the babies need to be warmer, so they cluster around them at night also. But in the summer now, in the day, they would, be okay, probably. The queen's job is just to get impregnated and lay eggs. She can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. She's fed, she's cleaned, she doesn't ever leave the hive until she's going to, if she chooses to swarm, if she feels like it's too crowded and maybe she could go somewhere else, that's when she'll swarm. Or if she feels, I don't know, but sometimes they decide to swarm, and then they'll leave with half of the hive, and they'll look for a new place to start. And that's the way nature takes care of the new queen would then have the home and the setup and the honey. The old queen is the one who has to go out and try to make it keep going. But at least the new queen then is a younger, viable, hopefully, version, and they can keep each other going, the bee population. problems with bees that have come up? Yes, there have been problems. I just heard a lecture on NPR the other day, and they said it was the 3 Ps. One was poor nutrition, one was parasites, and the other was pesticides. And the average person can't do anything about the parasites. And the nutrition part, you can plant flowers, that's good. You know, there are different flowers that offer more nectar. It's important to have flowers flowering all season. You want flowers from the beginning of spring until the end of fall, and that way you give them a food source. The bees can fly from 1 to 5 miles to get food, but they would like to go the least amount possible. Here in a neighborhood, there's so many plantings and flowering trees that it's very easy for the bees to have enough food source. But if you're off in the woods, say, the spring ephemerals would be there, but then it gets a little harder as the summer gets dry and hot. They may have to go a little more to look for food. And water, always need water, just like all of us. We need food, shelter, and water. And dandelions, I want to talk about dandelions. Dandelions get such a bad rap. They're the first flower in the spring that provide pollen for bees that are looking for pollen. And there are native bees, and native bees live side by side with honeybees. There's plenty of pollen for all of them. But people want to poison their lawns to get rid of them. And if you can think about memories, most of the time you're allowed to pick dandelions because people think of them as unworthy flowers. But they're lovely. We all pick them. They're soft, they're yellow. You know, you've made a bouquet of dandelions. So I would like that people would think, you know, start to think about that. And lawns. My lawn, I haven't used pesticides since I've lived here. And I put some clover there, and I just reseed. That's what I do, compost and reseeding. I just don't want to have chemicals on my lawn because they don't go away. You can step on them, and the bees take them in the hive. They don't mean to. When some of the flowers from the big box nurseries, they use pesticides to keep them healthy and looking good. And when the plant grows, it still has the pesticides in it. And so even on the leaves and in the pollen and in the nectar, there can be the pesticide. So the bee drinks it and brings it back to the hive. And then another bee drinks it from some other place with a different pesticide. And then it all gets mixed in. And so they find that there can be up to 15 different pesticides in the wax that the bees have collected from various places. You're only supposed to keep the wax on the combs for 3 years. That way you can ensure that there isn't a buildup of pesticides in it. But it certainly would help if people used less chemical pesticides. And maybe less lawn. You know, milkweed for the monarchs, those poor butterflies. They need all the help they can get. Farms in the United States, and it would be a family's farm, and they would grow their own vegetables, and they would have a flower garden, and there might even be weeds and flowers along the side of the farm. But what's happened is big monoculture farms have been developed, and every square space that can be used for agriculture is, and so there's no place for insects to go and get nectar if it's out of season. Like almond trees bees are brought there to pollinate. Native bees could do the job. It's just that native bees are solitary, and they live mostly in the ground or in sticks. And there's only, even if there's a colony, there might be 3,000, whereas in honeybees, there's 7,000 to 50,000, 70,000 bees in a hive. So the numbers just don't work. You know, honeybees, there's just so many more of them to do the job. But anyway, so a bee couldn't live there because they would only eat almond when, or almond pollen and nectar when the plants were flowering. Otherwise there'd be nothing to eat. And it's like even French fries. If you like French fries, that's great, but do you want to eat French fries for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for a month or two? It doesn't make you healthy. So they need to have the mix, like we all do, of different food sources and the choices of different food sources. Hopefully they'll start to create some more areas where some native bees can live and some native plants and flowers can be grown, so honeybees actually could live there instead of always being trucked in, because sometimes when they're trucked in they get diseases or other things. But we need commercial beekeepers. Sometimes you might want to think, oh, they don't care because but they're very important to our agriculture, and we wouldn't have all of our wonderful things that we love and take advantage of when we go in the grocery store. So we need to support the commercial beekeepers too. It's just a little different when it's your home backyard. I don't have that. I mean, this is much more personal and I can take more time to do something. Harvesting, people say, oh, well, the bees make it. Yes, they make it, and they put it in this lovely hexagon container I was telling you about, and they seal it with wax, and they found it in tombs from Egypt, and it's still good. So it's very sealed, and so when you want to take it out, honey is thick and viscous, so not very viscous. So you need to cut the top layer of wax off and put it in a centrifuge and spin it to have the honey come out. And then it drips down, and then you have to filter it, and then you have to put it in bottles. And in the meantime, you have to make sure that the bees, you can't do that with any bees around because they would all come to you. So it's a lot of work. My husband does the honey extracting. I at one point tried to just cut comb out and convince people that comb and honey was delicious, because it really is. Each honeycomb is a day when the bees collected enough nectar and fanned it down to 17% and sealed it. It's like magic. It was a day earlier in the summer or in the spring, and I don't know. It's just very like special. I don't know. Some people don't like to eat the wax, and it is more expensive. And I don't know. We're just like, we want to put it in our coffee or tea or drizzle it on our cereal, and that's good too. I believe that the honey is healthy, good sugar for you. I do believe that. The nectar is the carbohydrates for the bees, and the pollen is the protein, the lipids, and the minerals. So, that's what keeps them going. They need everything like that. And they make beautiful stores of it. And when a bee starts out in the morning, they pick one flower, and they may go to other flowers, but their intention is only to collect that specific type of pollen. And that's how they do pollination, because when they go from one flower to the next, they bring pollen with them, and then it gets on the stigma, and then it goes down, and then it fertilizes, and then they can make seeds to make fruit and flowers. Bees have a magnetism, and they're hairy. So when they go near the pollen, it sticks to them. They have little baskets in the back of their hind legs. They're called pollen baskets, and they do put the pollen there for, to collect it, to bring it back. But Mother Nature has them collecting pollen on their body. And if you look at different flower shapes, you can see that sometimes they may have to wiggle into one, or, they're spread out in others. And that's some of the ways that the flowers offer the nectar to different insects. The proboscis, which is the tongue where they drink the nectar, on butterflies is longer, so they can go deeper. Hummingbirds have a long beak, so they can go into flowers like trumpet vines and honeysuckles. If a bee is desperate, they'll cheat and slice the bottom of a flower and drink the nectar from that. But they try to just, they do whatever's the easiest. So they really don't have anything to cut. They don't have something to cut with their mouth.